Today we're going to talk a little bit more about what trade. Well, what is trade? It is one of the oldest activities undertaken by humans. Maritime trade boomed in Southeast Asia as seafarers from the Middle East, India, and China engaged in exchanges of cotton, sugar, spices, tea, and steel destined for Europe. Within many national economies, trade helped forge new social classes, though otherwise known as merchants, becoming a major instrument of wealth. Trade has also shaped new institutions that contributed to market stability. Based on the World Bank data and assuming imports and exports, to generate a total trade value, more than 161 countries around the world posted a trade to the GDP ratio greater than 50% just in 2008. Trade within Asia makes up the second most important intra-regional flow, accounting for approximately 11% of world trade. Now, North America trade flows are dominated by exchanges between Canada and the US, and it makes up only about 4% of the world trade. This chapter, also chapter 1, represents an overview of the key concepts discussed within the book. Moving on along to chapter 2, it explores different theories of international trade, shows how the economic gains from trade are generated, and discusses the factors that influence who captures just those gains. With external economies of scale, markets often compromise many firms that are small in size. With trade increasing demand, it may lead to further economies pushing down unit prices. We learned also how the Heckscher and Olin, otherwise known as HO, argue that it gains from trade in their model that results from countries specializing in production of commodities that use their abundant factors of production intensively, whereas the benefits of trade captured by each country depend on the terms of the trade. The comparative advantage of the HO models of trade assume that the countries engaging in the trade, because of either differences in technology or differences in factor endowments, or sometimes both. However, the HO model builds a framework from trade that focuses on factor abundance, inevitably. Whereas Chapter 3, Transitional Corporations, Trade, and the Global Economy, explores the rise of transactional corporations, otherwise known as TNCs, to gain a better understanding of their operations and significance within the world economy, especially with their roles in orchestrating trade. It discusses the changing geography of production with a capitalist market economy. The chapter explores reasons for the existence of firms and changes in the organizations of productions and its geography, and outlines the conditions under which some firms benefit from TNCs. The global economy of the early 21st century is also qualitatively different from that of earlier periods of arm's length interactions, with commodity production integrated across many countries of the world in ways that we have never ever seen before. Now, TNCs often form to explore geographies of factor abundance and thus varying spices that must be paid to secure key inputs to production around the global economy. Now, the emergence of the global economy proceeded hand in hand with the growth in the number and the significance of TNCs. What I believe to have had been the most key highlight or most important theory and the most important within the entire chapter is how the growth of TNCs have and will continue to grow rapidly over the last decades. It is shockingly that it has caused fragmentations in the production process and the integration of complex networks and the value chains that tie workers, firms, and the nations to the global economy. It is estimated that approximately 80% of all world trade related to GPMs controlled by TNCs. because there is such a broad agreement of how TNC's services have become super important globally. Many reports have been made, thus making 48% of the nations and exports 42% of the imports. Finally, the importance of transitional corporations like these help provide the subjects of international economies. They are key factors when it comes to the effects of new trends in international businesses, and TNCs increase more while continuing to introduce capital and technology to a variety of countries, making it one of the biggest and most important contributions to the nation. The constant competition and rapid shifts of technology have become aggressively large, but are helping the countries, and it rapidly shifts the technology to be more aggressively, but are helping the countries evolve in a more positive manner. Therefore, the effectiveness of these countries to be able to adapt and take these challenges to a greater level have gradually become better. I love how they have been able to continue to do so, thus is being what I believe the key factor and the best highlight overall within the chapter. Moving along to chapter 4, trade governance. This chapter describes the rationales as well as the instruments of protectionism, instructional theories, and the forms of governance created to prevent trade policy from returning to the protectionism of the 1930s. Institutional theory offers a theoretical rationale for explaining how trade conflicts may be reduced since institutions enable interactions to be constructive in ways such as behavior that may be more predictable overall. Much of the trade governance has occurred at the continental regional scale, but the World Trade Organization, again also known as WTO, represents the most ambitious governing mechanism for ensuring global free trade. The WTO has led to a more efficient system of handling trade and the conflicts within it. International trade is increasingly a governed process. Tariffs are the most common form of barriers of trade. Trade relations were not so complicated given the small membership size, and the most of the negotiations focused on merchandise trade and the tariffs. According to your perspective, it may not correlate with mine, so therefore I conclude that the concept that is being the most important from the trade within the WTO would be global international organization dealing with the rules of trade between nations. It is established that the WTO agreements were negotiated and co-signed with the bulk of trading nations that ratified with each one of their parliaments. It's fascinating how it aims to promote the free trade by lowering tariffs and other barriers that align with trading. Last but not least, we have a little bit of a description of the complex relationships of trade and economic development within Chapter 5. Economic growth and development is a complex issue where trade is the only factor in the equation. Historically, economic development in the West has been accompanied by sectoral transformation from primary to manufacturing and then advanced producing services. Economic studies examining the effect of trade on economic growth somewhat mixed results. Therefore, aligning with Ballas's stages of comparative advantage model offering a narrative framework to attain economic development through trade. One way to explain the pattern of exports among the countries here is to apply Ballas's dynamic module of comparative advantage. In this module, Ballassa regards economic development to be a linear process involving the gradual accumulation of physical capital, skills, human capital, technological, and know-how among firms. The module thus analyzes import substitutes with export orientation in various stages that enables the country to gradually acquire comparative advantage in more technology. Thus, this combines chapters 1 through 5, brief overview / summary. Thank you.